Welcome back to TokiCast, my friend. Tonight I want to tell you that you may have been sleeping wrong your entire life, and not in the way you think. Not because you go to bed too late, or look at your phone, or drink coffee in the afternoon. Something much stranger than that. Let me ask you something first. Have you ever woken in the middle of the night, in the deep dark, for no reason at all? 2 in the morning, or 3, wide awake, with the house silent around you? And did you feel that small cold flicker of worry? Something is wrong with me. My sleep is broken. I will be exhausted tomorrow. And then, did you lie there, trying to force yourself back down, and find that the more you tried, the more awake you became? Here is the strange, true thing, my friend, and I want you to hold on to it. For most of human history, that was not a problem. That was simply the middle of the night. It had a name. People expected it. They planned for it. Your ancestors did not sleep in one long, unbroken block the way you are trying to. They slept twice. Take a slow breath, and let me show you the forgotten history of sleep. A world where everyone went to bed shortly after dark and woke again around midnight. A gap of 1 or 2 quiet hours in the middle of the night that had its own customs, its own conversations, its own name. A historian who found hundreds of references to it hiding in plain sight in old books and realized nobody had noticed. An experiment in a dark room that made modern people fall back into the ancient pattern within weeks, and an invention that quietly erased a habit humans had kept for thousands of years. Stay with me, and you may never worry about waking at 3 in the morning again. If this gives you a little wonder and a little calm, leave a like and subscribe. It means everything to us here at TokiCast. Let us begin with the discovery itself, because it is a wonderful piece of detective work. A historian named Roger Eckerch was researching the history of nighttime. Not sleep, particularly, just night. What people did after dark. Crime, work, travel, fear. And as he read through old documents, court records, diaries, letters, medical books, plays and poems from across the centuries, he began to notice a phrase that made no sense to a modern reader. First sleep. It appeared again, and again, and again. Someone would say they woke after their first sleep. Something happened between first sleep and second sleep. A character would rise at the end of their first sleep to do something. At first it might look like a curiosity, but he kept finding it. Over many years, he gathered hundreds upon hundreds of references across many countries and many languages, all pointing at the same thing. People used to sleep in 2 shifts, and once you know the phrase, it turns out to be everywhere. It sits in famous old texts that scholars had read for centuries, and everyone had simply skimmed past it, because we assume our own way of doing things is the natural way, and so we do not notice when the past is quietly telling us otherwise. So what did this old pattern actually look like? Roughly, and it varied by place and season, it went something like this. As darkness fell, people went to bed. Not at 11 at night, often within a couple of hours of sunset, because in a world without cheap light, there was very little to do, and lighting was expensive. They slept for around 3 or 4 hours. This was the first sleep. Then, somewhere around the middle of the night, they woke, naturally, without an alarm, without distress, and they stayed awake for perhaps an hour, sometimes 2. Then they went back to sleep for another 3 or 4 hours, until dawn, the second sleep. Now here is my favorite part of all of this, my friend. What did people do in that waking hour in the middle of the night? Almost everything. They prayed. There are prayers and devotional instructions written specifically for this waking period. They talked quietly with whoever was beside them, and there are suggestions that this was one of the most intimate and relaxed conversation times in a household, because the day's demands were far away in both directions. They tended the fire. They checked on animals. Some got up and did small tasks that needed doing. There are accounts suggesting people occasionally visited neighbors in the middle of the night, which sounds bizarre to us and was apparently unremarkable then. They lay in bed and thought, and this one interests me most of all. There is a lovely detail that people would use this period to reflect on their dreams, which were fresh in the mind because they had just come out of them, rather than losing them by morning, as we usually do. Can you imagine a world where the middle of the night was not empty and anxious, but was a soft, quiet, semi-private hour that belonged to you? And the language of the past kept the pattern alive in other ways too, hiding it in phrases we still half use. Think of the expression, the dead of night. Think of references to the watches of the night, a way of dividing darkness into portions, used by soldiers and sailors and religious communities. Monasteries had prayers appointed for the middle of the night, and monks would rise in the dark to sing them, which sounds like extraordinary devotion to us, and was, in one sense, simply fitting a religious duty into a gap that everyone had anyway. Even the layout of a home tells us something. Beds were often shared. Whole families slept in one room, sometimes with animals nearby for warmth. Waking in the night was not a solitary experience the way it is for many of us now. You woke into a room with other people breathing beside you, and if they were awake too, you talked. That, I think, is part of what we lost. Not just the hour, but the company inside it. Now, naturally, a claim like this needs more than old books, and this is where the story becomes really compelling, because it was tested. In the 1990s, a researcher named Thomas Wehr ran an experiment on modern people. He put volunteers into an environment with 14 hours of darkness each night, roughly what a person might experience in winter before artificial lighting existed, and simply left them there for weeks. At first, they did what exhausted modern people do. They slept enormously, catching up on the sleep debt they had built up in ordinary life. But then, after some weeks, something remarkable happened. Their sleep settled into a new pattern. They began to sleep in 2 blocks, separated by a period of 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. They had not been told to do it. They were not trying to recreate history. Given long darkness, modern human bodies drifted into the same shape that the old documents describe. And there is a further detail that I find genuinely moving. Wehr reported that during that middle waking period, his subjects were in an unusual state, not agitated, not bored, calm, meditative, restful. Measurements suggested a distinctive hormonal state during that window, something quite different from ordinary daytime alertness. People described it as peaceful. So if this pattern is so natural, and so old, and so widespread, what happened to it? Why do you and I not live this way? The answer is light. For almost all of human history, artificial light was expensive and poor. Candles cost money. Oil cost money. If you were an ordinary family, you did not sit up burning your wages simply to be awake in the dark. So when the sun went down, the day ended. Then, gradually, light became cheap. Better lamps arrived. Streets began to be lit at night in growing cities. Coffee houses and taverns and theaters began to fill the evening with things to do. Night stopped being a wall and started being a place you could go. And then came the transformation that finished it. Widespread artificial lighting in the home, and eventually the electric bulb, meant that the evening could stretch as far as you wanted it to. And here is what that did. It did not add hours to the day. It moved them. People began going to bed later and later, but the morning did not move, because work, and later school, and later factories and trains and offices, all demanded that you be somewhere at a fixed hour. So the night got squeezed, and the first casualty was the gap in the middle. If you go to bed at 9, you have plenty of night to divide into 2. If you go to bed at midnight and must rise at 6, you have exactly 1 block available and no room for anything else. Segmented sleep did not get banned, it got crowded out. Within a few generations, the pattern faded from memory so completely that we forgot it had ever existed and began to believe that a single unbroken block was the only correct way for a human being to sleep. And sleep was not the only rhythm that got flattened. Consider the afternoon rest that still survives in some warm parts of the world. The pause in the hottest hours when shops close and everything slows. For a long time in many cultures, Sleep was not one solid block dropped into the night. It was distributed across the day and night in whatever way the climate, the work, and the light allowed. Farmers slept differently in winter and summer because winter nights are enormous and summer nights are short. Their sleep breathed with the seasons in the same way their working hours did. What we have now, one fixed block, at fixed hours, all year round, regardless of the season or the weather or the light, is not the natural human condition. It is a schedule, and it was designed to fit something else entirely. It was designed to fit work. The rhythm of your night is downstream of a factory whistle that stopped blowing a century ago. And that belief has a cost, my friend, which brings us to the part that matters most for you. Today, waking in the middle of the night is often treated as a disorder. There is even a specific term for it in modern sleep medicine, and people carry real anxiety about it. They lie in the dark, watching the clock, calculating how many hours they have left, and the calculating itself keeps them awake. But if the older pattern is genuinely part of our biology, then some of those people are not broken at all. Some of them may simply be doing something very old in a world that no longer leaves room for it, and then panicking about it. Now let me be careful and honest here. I am telling you history, not medicine. Genuine sleep problems are real, they can be serious, and if your sleep is badly affecting your life, that is something to discuss with a doctor, not with a storyteller. But there is a gentler idea inside this history that costs nothing. If you wake at 3 in the morning and feel calm, you may not need to fight it. Historically, that hour was not an emergency. It was simply the middle of the night, and it belonged to you, and people used it to pray, to think, to talk quietly, to remember their dreams. The panic may be a modern addition. The waking may be ancient. There is one more thread worth pulling here, because it complicates the story in an honest way. Not every historian agrees that segmented sleep was universal. Some argue that the evidence is strongest for certain regions and certain periods, especially in Northern Europe with its very long winter nights, and that it may not describe every society on Earth in every era. There is genuine debate about how widespread it truly was. And I think that is worth saying out loud, because a good story should not be allowed to bully the evidence. But even the skeptical version leaves something remarkable standing. Nobody seriously disputes that people once went to bed far earlier, that nights were far longer and darker, and that the tidy 8-hour block we treat as a law of nature is a recent arrangement shaped by lighting and by working hours. Whatever the exact ancient pattern was, it was not this. And that alone should loosen the grip that the clock beside your bed has on your sense of whether your body is behaving correctly. And let me add one more piece, because it explains why this matters more now than it did even 20 years ago. The light that broke the old pattern was, at first, warm. Candles, oil lamps, early bulbs, all of them glowed at the orange end of the spectrum, close to firelight. The body tolerates that reasonably well. The light we live in now is different. Screens and much modern lighting push out a great deal of light at the blue end of the spectrum, and blue light is precisely the signal the body uses to mean daytime. It is the color of the sky. So a person lying in bed at midnight scrolling on a bright screen is, as far as a very old part of the brain is concerned, sitting outside at noon. We did not merely stretch the evening. We convinced our own bodies that the sun had not gone down, and then we wondered why sleep felt harder. There is no lecture coming, my friend. I am not going to tell you to throw your phone away, and I would not follow that advice either. But it is worth knowing what the machinery is actually doing, because knowing changes how you interpret your own tiredness. It is not a personal failing, it is a very old system receiving a very new signal. So let us look back at the road we have walked together. We began with that small, cold moment of worry when you wake in the dark. We followed a historian who kept noticing a strange phrase in old documents and realized that the whole world used to sleep in 2 shifts. We stood inside that quiet middle hour where people prayed and talked and thought and turned over their dreams. We watched modern volunteers, placed in long darkness, drift back into the very same rhythm. and we watched cheap light stretch the evening until the gap in the middle was crushed out of existence and then forgotten entirely. And here is the quiet part, the part that is really about you. There is something in this that goes beyond sleep. We tend to assume that the way we live now is the way humans have always lived, that 8 unbroken hours is simply what a body does, that the working day has a natural shape, that the way our time is divided is a fact of nature rather than a fairly recent arrangement. And then you find something like this, a habit held by our species for thousands of years and lost so completely within a few generations that we forgot it existed at all, and you realize how much of what feels permanent is actually just recent. That is worth remembering, I think, when something in your life feels impossible to change. Enormous, deep, universal human habits have shifted before, sometimes within a single lifetime, simply because the conditions around them changed. And on the smaller, kinder level, here is what I would leave you with. If you wake tonight in the deep dark, and the house is silent, and there is no reason for it, try this before you reach for your phone or start counting the hours you have lost. Just lie there. Let it be an hour that belongs to you. Think about your dreams while they are still close. Listen to the quiet. You would not be broken. You would be keeping company with almost every human being who has ever lived. Now tell me, which part surprised you the most? That the phrase, "first sleep," is hiding in old books everywhere, that modern people fall back into the pattern in long darkness, or that cheap light quietly erased a habit thousands of years old? Write it in the comments below. I truly love hearing which part stayed with you. And before you go, a small riddle for our next story. Picture something white and sweet that sits in almost every kitchen on Earth and costs almost nothing. It was once so rare it was sold by apothecaries as medicine, and later it drove one of the largest and cruelest forced migrations in human history. Millions of lives were spent producing it, so that people far away could have something sweet. What could it be? Come back soon, and we will find out together. Until then, take care of yourself, my friend. This has been TokiCast, where the small things quietly change the world. I'll see you soon.